the day I signed the $2 billion merger. My father handed me a box and replaced me with my brother, Julian. They thought I was just a placeholder. Forgetting I was the company's operating system, I didn't argue, I just walked out. 3 weeks later, as the stock plummeted, my phone vibrated. 1 call, 10 calls. When it hit 666 missed calls from my family, I knew hell had opened its doors for them. My name is Anastasia Rowland, and for the last 1,825 days, I have been the invisible engine keeping a sinking ship afloat. If you walked into the headquarters of Vanguard Logistics 5 years ago, you would have smelled the stagnation. It was in the carpet, a scent of old dust and older money, mixed with the acrid panic of a company that had leveraged itself into oblivion. My father, Robert, had made a series of disastrous fleet acquisitions in the early 2000s, purchasing heavy tonnage ships just before the market shifted toward air freight and lean supply chains. He had built a monument to his own ego, and it was taking on water faster than the pumps could clear it. I did not step in because I wanted the glory. I stepped in because I was the only one in the room who knew how to read a balance sheet without hallucinating a profit. For 5 years, I ceased to be a person. I became a function. I became a creature of caffeine and blue light. Living in the corner office on the 45th floor, I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I missed my best friend's wedding. I missed the funeral of my favorite aunt. I missed every single holiday because global logistics does not pause for Christmas or Thanksgiving. While my family was skiing in Aspen or sunbathing in the French Riviera, I was on conference calls with harbor masters in Rotterdam and union leaders in Long Beach, negotiating pennies off the dollar to keep our margins alive. I called it Project Phoenix. It was an aggressive restructuring plan designed to modernize our entire infrastructure, shifting us from a bloated shipping dinosaur into a tech-forward logistics power. It was my child. I nurtured it. I fed it my youth and my sanity. And this morning, at 9 o'clock, Project Phoenix finally rose. The merger with a major European distribution network was signed. The deal was worth $2 billion. It was done. The stock was up 12% in pre-market trading. We were safe. Vanguard was safe. I walked into the boardroom with the ink still drying on the contracts in my briefcase. I expected a bottle of champagne. I expected a handshake. Perhaps, in a moment of weakness, I even expected my father to look at me with something resembling pride. Instead, I found the room strangely cold. The climate control was set to 68 degrees, standard for the servers, but freezing for humans. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He was wearing his lucky navy tie, the one he only wore when he had to deliver bad news to shareholders. My mother, Eleanor, sat to his right. She never attended board meetings. Her presence was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix. She was wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than the annual salary of our warehouse managers. Her hands clasped tightly over a leather folio. I set my briefcase down. The sound echoed in the silence. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "The European deal is closed. Funds will clear by close of business tomorrow." Robert did not look me in the eye. He looked at a point somewhere past my left shoulder, focusing on the abstract painting of a storm at sea that hung on the wall, a painting I had bought to remind us of where we had been. "That is excellent work." "Anastasia," Robert said. His voice was thin, reedy. It lacked the baritone resonance he used when he was commanding a room. "Truly excellent. You have done a marvelous job stabilizing the ship." I waited. The word but was hanging in the air, invisible and heavy as an anvil. However, Eleanor cut in, her tone dripping with a sugary, toxic sweetness. She smiled, but the lines around her eyes did not move. "We have been discussing the future of Vanguard. Now that the crisis is over, thanks to your diligence, we need to think about the long-term image of the family legacy." "Image," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. Robert finally looked at me. He cleared his throat, a nervous tic he had never managed to conquer. "The board and the family feel that for this next phase, The company needs a different kind of energy. Project Phoenix was a wartime strategy, but peace requires a different general. We are looking for a visionary, someone who projects strength, stability, someone who embodies the traditional values of the Roland name. I stared at him. I had just saved his legacy from bankruptcy. I had just secured $2 billion. What was more strong or stable than that, I do not understand. I said, though the icy knot in my stomach told me I understood perfectly. We are restructuring the C-suite, Robert said, speaking faster now, wanting to get the unpleasantness over with. We are eliminating the position of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. You are firing me. I stated, it was not a question. We are letting you go to pursue other opportunities, Eleanor corrected, as if she were speaking to a maid who had broken a vase. You have been looking so tired lately, Anastasia. It breaks a mother's heart to see her daughter age so prematurely. You need rest. You need to find a husband. You need a life suitable for a woman of your station. And who, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low, is going to run the company? Who is going to manage the integration of the European network? Who understands the proprietary algorithms I wrote to manage the fuel hedging? The double doors at the far end of the room swung open. Julian walked in. My younger brother was 28 years old. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit that was cut too tight in the shoulders and too short in the ankles, a style he claimed was European, but just made him look like he was growing out of his clothes. He had a fresh haircut, the sides faded with military precision, and he reeked of a cologne that smelled like burnt wood and desperation. He was grinning. It was the grin of a man who had just won a race he did not run. Hey, sis, Julian said, breezing past me to take the seat at the opposite end of the table. The CEO's seat. Julian is taking over as Chief Executive Officer, Robert announced, a flush of color finally returning to his cheeks. He has the vision. He has the charisma. The market responds well to a strong male lead. It signals confidence. I looked at Julian. This was the boy who had failed the bar exam 3 times. The boy who had tried to start a luxury tequila brand and lost $4 million of family money in 6 months. The boy who was currently spinning a car key fob around his finger. I recognized the logo. It was a McLaren. Nice car. I said, thanks, Julian replied, not sensing the trap. Just picked it up this morning. Company car. Gotta look the part. Right? You bought a $300,000 car using the liquidity form the merger before the funds even cleared, I asked. It is a signing bonus, Eleanor snapped. Stop being petty, Anastasia. It is unbecoming. Julian needs to project success to attract success. I looked around the room. I looked at the people who shared my DNA. They were not business people. They were parasites who had convinced themselves they were the host. They truly believed that the hard work was done. They believed that the systems I had built were self-sustaining perpetual motion machines. They thought they could just sit in the captain's chair and the ship would steer itself. I realized then that arguing was pointless. You cannot explain quantum physics to a toddler, and you cannot explain supply chain logistics to narcissists. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my skirt. Very well, I said. Robert blinked. He had expected a fight. He had expected me to scream, to cry, to beg. He had his rebuttals ready. My surrender confused him. Just like that, he asked, "It is your company," I said. "If you believe Julian is the best choice, then I respect the decision of the board." Julian clapped his hands together. "Awesome. Look, Anna, no hard feelings. You were great at the boring stuff. Seriously. But we are going to pivot. I was thinking we need to rebrand. New logo, something with fire, and open floor plans. The vibe in here is too sterile. We need ping-pong tables. We need to disrupt the industry." He was talking about ping-pong tables while we had containers of volatile chemicals navigating the Suez Canal. "I will pack my things," I said. "You do not need to worry about that," Eleanor said, gesturing to the door. "We have had security pack your personal effects. A box is waiting for you at the front desk. We need you to leave the premises immediately. It is standard protocol for high-level departures. We cannot risk any emotional retaliation. Emotional retaliation. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. Two men in dark suits stepped into the room. I knew them. One was David, the head of site security. I had hired him 3 years ago when his wife got sick and he needed better insurance. He could not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, his face burning with shame. "Ms. Rowland," David mumbled. "I am sorry. I have to ask for your badge. Your phone and your laptop." I handed them over. The phone was my lifeline. The laptop contained my life. Handing them over felt like an amputation. Robert stood up and offered me a hand, then pulled it back when he saw the look in my eyes. "You will thank us for this one day. Anastasia, you were drowning in this work. We are setting you free. You are right." I said, "I was drowning." I turned to Julian. "Good luck." "Julian, the login for the executive dashboard is the standard admin protocol. Do not forget to check the daily variance reports." Julian waved a hand dismissively. Yeah, I will hire a guy for that. I am big picture now." I walked out of the boardroom. I walked down the long corridor lined with portraits of dead white men who had built this company, and the living white men who were destroying it. David walked beside me, his presence a silent apology. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the sight of my family. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist handed me a cardboard box. Inside was a framed photo of my dog, a dried-up succulent, and a coffee mug that said, "Boss Lady," a gag gift from a secretary I had fired 2 years ago. That was it. 5 years of blood and sweat distilled into a box of junk. I walked through the revolving doors and into the harsh sunlight of the financial district. The noise of the city hit me: horns, sirens, the hum of millions of people chasing money. I stood on the curb and took a deep breath. For the first time in 5 years, my lungs filled with air that did not smell of recycled office ventilation. They thought they had stripped me of my power. They took my title. They took my access badge. They took the devices that connected me to the global grid. But they had forgotten one thing. Vanguard Logistics did not run on software. It ran on me. For 5 years, I had not just managed the company, I had become the manual override for a broken system. The automated software they were so proud of, it was flawed. It had a tendency to flag legitimate shipments as high risk and route perishable goods to long-term storage. I had never fixed the code because the legacy code was a tangled mess of spaghetti that would cost millions to rewrite. Instead, I had implemented a workaround, a human workaround, me. Every morning at 4 o'clock, a secure prompt would appear on the CEO's dashboard. It was a fail-safe I had designed. It listed every major automated decision the system was about to execute for the next 24 hours: routing changes, credit releases, fuel purchases, customs declarations, and every morning, for 5 years, I manually reviewed them. I clicked approve. I clicked deny. I caught the errors. I smoothed the glitches. I authorized the transfers that kept the fuel flowing and the ships moving. I was the bridge between their terrible software and reality. When David took my laptop, he took the interface. When they revoked my credentials, they revoked the only user ID authorized to access that daily prompt. I did not plant a virus. I did not delete a single file. I did not change a line of code to cause harm. I simply ceased to exist. Tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock, the system would generate the prompt. It would wait for Anastasia Rowland to tell it what to do. It would wait for the human hand to guide it through the complex web of international trade laws and fuel arbitrage. It would wait, and wait, and wait. And when no command came, the system would default to its base programming safety mode. It would halt all non-verified transactions. It would ground the fleet. It would freeze the accounts payable to prevent fraud. I hailed a taxi. The driver looked at me, at the box in my hands, and gave me a sympathetic nod. "Rough day?" he asked. I looked back at the glass tower of Vanguard Logistics, piercing the sky like a needle. "No," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "Today is a holiday." I got into the car. I did not look back. The countdown had already begun. They had 24 hours before the ghost in the machine realized it was alone, and by then, I would be very, very hard to reach. My apartment was a ghost in the city tax records. It sat on the top floor of a building that Vanguard Logistics did not own, paid for by a limited liability company that had no paper trail linking it to the Rowland Family Trust. I had bought it 4 years ago, 6 months after I covered up Julian's first embezzlement attempt. I remember signing the deed with a trembling hand, realizing that I was not buying a home. I was buying a bunker. I was buying the only place on earth where I did not have to be Anastasia Rowland, the fixer, the daughter, the endless supply of labor. I locked the door behind me. The heavy click of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. The space was cool and gray, stripped of the Baroque clutter my mother adored. There were no gold leaf frames, no velvet drapes, no portraits of ancestors glaring down in judgment. Just polished concrete floors, a single Italian leather sofa, and a wall of glass overlooking the city that had just chewed me up and spat me out. I walked to the kitchen island and placed my personal phone on the counter. It was the only device I had left. The screen was already lighting up. Not with calls, they were too busy drinking my champagne for that, but with notifications from the business world. LinkedIn alerts, Market Watch updates. The news of the leadership change had hit the wire services. Julian Rowland appointed CEO of Vanguard Logistics. Visionary heir takes the helm. I read the headline and felt a dry, humorless laugh bubble up in my chest. Visionary. The only thing Julian had ever envisioned was how to open a beer bottle with his teeth. I held the power button down. The screen went black. The room plunged into a deeper, more profound silence. This was the first time in 10 years that I was unreachable. There was no red light blinking on a BlackBerry, no urgent emails pinging my watch. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the setting sun painting the room in bruised shades of purple and orange. I did not cry. Crying implies a loss, and I was beginning to realize that I had not lost anything. I had been unburdened while I stood in the dark, sipping a glass of water. I knew exactly what was happening across town at the Rowland estate. I did not need a live feed to see it. I knew the script. My mother would be wearing her emerald necklace, the one she claimed was an heirloom, but was actually purchased after a massive tax refund I had secured for them 3 years ago. She would be holding court in the solarium, telling the board members' wives that it was her idea to let me go, that I was fragile, that the pressure was too much for a woman without a family of her own, and Julian would be drunk on power. I walked over to my personal desktop computer. It was a custom-built machine, air-gapped from the internet for most of its life, containing the only leverage that mattered. I booted it up, the fan whirred to life. I opened a folder named Insurance. It was not a file of vindictiveness, it was a file of survival. Inside were the scanned copies of every document I had refused to sign, but which my father had forged my signature on anyway. There were the frantic text messages from Julian from 2 years ago, begging me to hide the $80,000 he had wired to an offshore gambling site using the corporate expense account. There were the emails from my mother asking me to classify her cosmetic surgeries as medical consulting fees for tax deduction purposes. I scrolled through the files. I was not going to leak them. Not yet. Leaking them now would look like the petty lashing out of a fired employee. It would be dismissed as a bitter vendetta. No, in the world of high-stakes corporate warfare, you do not shoot the enemy while they are standing guard. You wait until they are asleep. You wait until the house is already burning, and then you cut the water line. I closed the folder. I did not need to use the nuclear option. Julian was going to destroy himself without my help. I just needed to secure a front row seat. I logged into a dummy social media account I used to monitor market sentiment. I navigated to Julian's public profile. There it was, a story posted 14 minutes ago. He was standing on a table in the executive dining room. His tie was wrapped around his head like a bandana. He was spraying a bottle of Dom Perignon over a crowd of sycophants. The caption read, "New era. Out with the old. In with the bold. CEO Life Vanguard 2.0." I swiped to the next image. It was a memo, Julian had posted a picture of a termination list with the caption, "Trimming the fat." I zoomed in on the names. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Higgins, the 60-year-old head of human resources who knew the birthday of every employee's child. Fired, Marcus Chen, no relation to the lawyer I would meet later, but the brilliant, quiet data analyst who monitored the fuel efficiency algorithms. Fired, Sarah Jenkins, the liaison for the dock workers union, the only woman who could prevent a strike with a single phone call. Fired. Julian was not just firing people. He was removing the immune system of the company. He was firing the people who said no. He was surrounding himself with people who would say yes, right up until the moment the ship hit the iceberg. I switched tabs to the Vanguard vendor portal. I still had my read-only access through a Shell contractor account I had set up years ago to audit our third-party suppliers. I wanted to see where the money was going. I saw a new purchase order generated 2 hours ago. Contract cancellation tech, Sure Maintenance Systems. My breath hitched. TechSure was the firm that maintained the physical servers in the basement. They were the ones who ensured the cooling systems didn't fail, who patched the hardware vulnerabilities. It was a boring, expensive contract costing $200,000 a month. Julian had canceled it, and right below it, a new expenditure approval, real estate acquisition deposit for Villa Del Mar, Cabo San Lucas. $250,000. He had swapped the server maintenance budget for a vacation home. He literally traded the company's brain for a tan. It was almost too easy. He was pulling the bricks out of the foundation to build a patio. I sat back in my chair and watched the city lights flicker. The 24-hour countdown I had started when I left the building was ticking away. The silence in the apartment felt different now. It was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. The next morning, the first cracks appeared. I did not have to guess. I saw it on the public maritime tracking boards. Vanguard Ship 402, a massive container vessel carrying electronics from Tokyo to Los Angeles, had stopped moving. It was drifting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I knew exactly why. The automated fuel efficiency system required a daily handshake protocol, a code authorized by the COO, to release the reserve fuel tanks for the next leg of the journey. Without the code, the ship's computer assumed there was a leak or a theft, and it locked the engines to idle speed to preserve fuel. Captain Henderson would be calling headquarters right now. He would be screaming into the satellite phone, asking for the override code, but the call would go to the COO's office, an office that was empty. The phone would ring and ring. Eventually, it would forward to the CEO's desk. Julian would not answer. He was likely hungover, sleeping off the champagne and the victory. By noon, 3 more ships had flagged errors. A cargo of pharmaceuticals sitting in a temperature-controlled warehouse in Rotterdam was flagging a temperature-critical warning. The cooling units needed a manual reset authorization after a routine cycle check. No one sent the authorization. The system, designed to protect the integrity of the facility, shut down the intake valves. The drugs were now sitting in a rapidly warming metal box. I sipped my coffee. I imagined the panic starting to ripple through the middle management, the ones Julian hadn't fired yet. They would be running around the 45th floor, knocking on doors, looking for someone with a master key. But the master key was in a cardboard box, in a landfill, or wiped clean by IT. My personal phone, which I had turned back on only to check flight schedules, buzzed. It was a voicemail, from Eleanor. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to delete it unheard, but I needed to know the temperature of the room. I pressed play. Anastasia. Her voice was slurring slightly. Gin and tonic. Likely. I heard you moved out of your company apartment. Dramatic. As always. Look, I know you are upset, but try to see this as a blessing. You are becoming so hard, so unpleasant. Julian is doing a marvelous job already. The energy in the office is so vibrant. Anyway, I spoke to Mrs. Wellington, and she needs someone to organize the charity flower show next month. It is unpaid, of course, but it would be good for you. Something gentle. Something suitable for a woman. Call me back when you stop pouting. The recording ended. Something suitable for a woman. I looked at the screen of my computer. where I could see the real-time data of a global logistics empire beginning to seize up like an engine without oil. I looked at the red warning lights blinking on the public tracker for Vanguard's fleet. I was not a flower arranger. I was the god of their machine. And they had just declared atheism. I picked up my credit card. I did not book a ticket to Paris or London or anywhere they could find me. I went to a charter broker website. I booked a one-way flight to a small, private eco-resort in the Raja Ampat Islands of Indonesia. It was a place with no roads, accessible only by boat. More importantly, the listing boasted digital detox as its main feature. No Wi-Fi in the villas, no cellular service, a satellite phone at the main desk for emergencies only. It was perfect. I packed a single suitcase, light clothes, sunscreen, and a book on contract law I had been meaning to reread. I left the suits in the closet. I left the heels by the door. Before I left, I did one last thing. I went to the building management website for my penthouse. I prepaid the rent for the next year. Then, I set up an auto-reply on my personal email. It did not say I have quit. It did not say contact Julian. It simply read, user not found. I took the elevator down to the garage. My car, a modest sedan I had bought with my own money, was waiting. I drove to the airport with the windows down. As I merged onto the highway, I saw a notification flash on the dashboard screen of my car, a news alert. Vanguard Logistics reports minor technical delays in Pacific shipping routes. Stock dips 2%. Minor. That was what they called it. A stage 1 cancer is also minor. Until it isn't. I turned the radio up. I did not want to hear the news. I wanted to hear the wind. I arrived at the private terminal. The pilot was waiting. He took my bag. Ready to go. Ms. Roland, he asked. I looked back at the skyline. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Julian was probably waking up, reaching for a glass of water, and wondering why his phone had 10 missed calls from the harbor master in Tokyo. He would brush it off. He would tell them to fix it themselves. He would go back to sleep, dreaming of his villa in Cabo. He did not know that the villa was bought with the money meant to keep the servers cool. He did not know that by next week, those servers would overheat and crash, taking the entire customer database with them. I am ready. I told the pilot. I climbed the steps into the jet. The door sealed shut, locking out the noise, the humidity, and the family that had drained me dry for a decade. As the plane taxied down the runway, I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out the phone one last time. Incoming call, Robert Rowland. My father. He never called. He only had his secretary call. If he was dialing me himself, the water was already rising past his ankles. I watched the name flash on the screen. Robert Rowland, the man who taught me that love was a transaction, and I was currently overdrawn. I did not decline the call. I did not answer it. I simply slid the window open on the side of my seat, a small vent for air, and dropped the phone onto the tarmac. We picked up speed. I watched the device tumble away. A small black rectangle getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared beneath the wheels of the jet. The plane lifted off. The G-force pressed me back into the leather seat. A heavy, comforting hand holding me down. Below me, the city turned into a grid of lights, then a blur, then nothing but clouds. I closed my eyes, for the first time in my life. I was not responsible for the crash. I was just a passenger. And the silence was beautiful. It took exactly 168 hours for the ghost in the machine to wake up and ask for its mother. 7 days. That was the length of the grace period I had coded into the Central Security Protocol. I called it the dead man switch, though in this case, it was a dead woman switch. The logic was simple. If the chief operating officer did not verify their biometric identity, a retinal scan, and a voice print once every 7 days, the system would assume the executive had been kidnapped, killed, or compromised. At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I was sipping coconut water on a pristine white beach in the Raja Ampat archipelago, the master server at Vanguard Logistics headquarters in New York initiated the handshake protocol. I can picture the scene with high-definition clarity. A red dialog box would have popped up on every screen in the executive suite. It would have locked down the dashboard, obscuring the shipping routes and the financial feeds. It would have pulsed with a single, polite request. Please verify identity. Authorization level alpha. Julian would have been sitting in my old chair, probably nursing a hangover from a week of celebratory drinking. He would have stared at the screen, annoyed that his game of Minesweeper or his browsing of luxury watches was interrupted. He would have clicked cancel. But you cannot cancel the handshake. The box would have remained. Please verify identity. I imagine he called the IT department. He would have screamed for the new head of IT, a 24-year-old kid named Kevin who was hired because he helped Julian set up his home theater system once. Julian would have pointed at the screen and demanded that Kevin make the annoying red box go away. Kevin, sweating through his cheap shirt, would have tried the admin passwords. Access denied. He would have tried to reboot the server. The system, sensing a power interruption during a security challenge, would have escalated the threat level. Just hack it, Julian would have shouted. I know how you nerds work. Just go into the code and delete the line that asks for the scan. I am the CEO. I authorize you to break the door down. That was the fatal error. The Vanguard system was not just a database. It was a fortress built on paranoia. I had designed it that way because we transported everything from microchips to medical isotopes. Security was paramount. The moment Kevin tried to force a script bypass, effectively trying to pick the lock, the system interpreted the action as a hostile external intrusion. It did not just lock the door, it welded the hinges shut and flooded the room with concrete. At 10:15 in the morning, the Vanguard database went into total lockdown mode. This meant that every single client file was encrypted with a 256-bit key. The customer relationship management software went black. The billing portals froze, and most critically, the digital bills of lading the passports for every container we had on the ocean vanished behind a firewall that no one in that building had the key to open. While Julian was screaming at a computer monitor in New York, I was watching a baby reef shark circle a patch of coral in the turquoise water. The piece was interrupted not by a phone mine was at the bottom of the Atlantic, but by a man sitting 2 bar stools away. He was reading a tablet, frowning deeply. You look like you're enjoying the silence a little too much, he said. I turned. He was handsome in a rugged, tired sort of way. Late 30s, gray at the temples, eyes that had seen too much paperwork and not enough sleep. He wore a linen shirt that was expensive but rumpled. Silence is expensive, I replied. I paid a lot for it. He tapped his tablet. Well, it seems like the rest of the world is getting loud. You follow the markets. Not anymore. I said, Vanguard Logistics just halted trading. He said, rumor is a massive cyber attack. They are saying hackers held their data hostage. The stock is down 8% in the last hour. I took a slow sip of my drink. Hackers. That was the narrative Julian was spinning. It was easier to claim you were attacked by Russians than to admit you were locked out of your own house because you threw away the keys. Interesting, I said. He looked at me. Really looked at me. His eyes narrowed. He had the gaze of a hunter. You are Anastasia Rowland. He stated. It was not a question. I stiffened. I had traveled 7,000 miles to be anonymous. And you are, I asked. Marcus. He said, former prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, Financial Crimes Division. I spent 2 years building a case against a hedge fund manager who liked to launder money through art galleries. I have a memory for faces, especially faces that used to appear in the Wall Street Journal under the headline 30 under 30. I relaxed. Slightly. A prosecutor. That explained the intensity. I am retired. Marcus. I said, you were fired. He corrected. The news cycle moves fast, but looking at you do not look like a woman who just lost her empire. You look like a woman who is watching the Colosseum burn from the royal box. I did not answer him. I did not need to. Back in New York, the chaos was shifting from digital to physical. With the client data locked, the phones at Vanguard began to ring. These were not polite calls. These were calls from global partners like Amazon, Walmart, and Pfizer. They wanted to know why they could not access their tracking data. They wanted to know why their shipments were flagged as unknown status. Julian, in his infinite arrogance, decided to field the call from the vice president of logistics for a major automotive manufacturer. I can imagine the conversation because I know Julian. He does not know how to apologize. He views an apology as a weakness. "Listen, it is just a glitch," Julian would have said, leaning back in my chair. "Feet up. We are upgrading the system. It is a feature, not a bug. You guys are so impatient. It will be back up when I say it is back up. Do not tell me how to run my logistics. My family built this industry." He hung up on a client who represented 15% of our annual revenue. 15 minutes later, that client canceled their contract for the next quarter, citing breach of service level agreement and unprofessional conduct. That was the first domino. When the market closed that day, Vanguard was bleeding. The stock had dropped 12%. The board of directors was panicking. They called my father, Robert. Robert did what Robert always did when cornered. He lied. He convened an emergency press conference. He stood at the podium, looking frail and distinguished, the very image of the elder statesman. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling with fake gravitas, "the rumors of a system failure are exaggerated. We are simply undergoing a robust security audit. Our financials have never been stronger. In fact, I have here the quarterly projections for the next fiscal year, showing a 20% growth." He held up a thick document. I knew that document. It was the projected growth strategy I had rejected 3 months ago. I had rejected it because it was fiction. It relied on aggressive accounting tricks, counting future contracts as current revenue and hiding debt in shell subsidiaries. It was illegal. It was fraud. I had refused to sign off on it. Throwing it in the trash can in front of him, he had fished it out of the trash. And now, he was presenting it to the world as fact. He had just committed securities fraud on live television, back at the resort. Marcus moved his stool closer. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I looked into Vanguard a few years ago. There was a blip, a series of wire transfers to a casino in Macau. $400,000. It looked like embezzlement, but then the money was replaced within 48 hours from a private account. The trail went cold. I always wondered who cleaned that up. I swirled the ice in my glass. The memory tasted bitter. Julian had stolen that money to pay off a debt to a triad loan shark. If I hadn't covered it, he would have been found floating in the Hudson River, or worse, arrested. I drained my savings account to save him. I sold my portfolio. I ate ramen noodles for 6 months to hide the hole in the balance sheet so the SEC wouldn't raid us. It was a clerical error. I said to Marcus, he chuckled, "A $400,000 clerical error. You are a good sister. Anastasia, or a foolish one." "Both," I said, "but I'm not a sister anymore." The real disaster struck on day 3 of the lockdown. Without the automated routing protocols, the dispatchers at the ports were flying blind. They were manually assigning containers to trucks based on paper manifests that were weeks out of date. In the port of Newark, a container with the ID number XJ9092 was offloaded from a ship. The manual manifest listed it as children's plastic toys. However, the digital system, the one that was currently encrypted, knew the truth. XJ9092 had been redesignated in transit. It contained 5,000 gallons of industrial-grade battery acid, destined for a specialized disposal facility in Ohio. But the dispatcher didn't know that. He looked at the paper. Toys. He assigned it to a standard flatbed truck driven by a guy named Earl, who was told to deliver it to a distribution center in a residential suburb of New Jersey. Earl drove carefully, but the container was old. The acid had been sloshing around for weeks. The seals were corroding. 10 miles outside of Newark, on a busy highway overpass, the bottom of the container gave way. It did not explode. It just poured. 5,000 gallons of highly corrosive acid cascaded onto the highway during rush hour. It melted the asphalt. It created a toxic cloud of vapor that drifted into a nearby elementary school playground. Thank God. The children were inside for assembly. But the images were apocalyptic. cars dissolving, the road smoking like a volcano, hazmat teams in spacesuits spraying foam while news choppers circled overhead, and on the side of the melting container, visible to every camera lens in America, was the logo Vanguard Logistics. The news channels did not talk about hackers anymore. They talked about negligence. They talked about an ecological disaster. They went to Julian for a comment. They caught him leaving a high-end steakhouse, looking flushed and irritated. A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Rowland, the chemical spill in Jersey. Did you know the manifest was incorrect? Why was acid labeled as toys?" Julian pushed the microphone away. "Look, accidents happen. Okay, it is the trucking company's fault. We just move the boxes. We do not look inside them. Talk to the driver." He blamed the driver. He blamed the guy making $20 an hour for a systemic failure of the executive branch. The internet exploded. The clip of Julian dismissing the poisoning of a highway went viral instantly. The hashtag #VanguardToxic began to trend, overtaking the latest celebrity gossip. At the resort, the sun was setting. The sky was a bruise of purple and blood red. Marcus handed me his tablet. "Look at this." I looked. It was not a news article. It was a leaked email. Someone inside Vanguard, maybe a disgruntled secretary, maybe a terrified middle manager, had sent a tip to the New York Times. Subject: "The CEO does not have the codes." The article was short but devastating. It revealed that the system lockdown was not a hack, but a lockout caused by the CEO's inability to pass a basic security check. It painted a picture of a company being flown by a pilot who couldn't even unlock the cockpit door. The sharks were not just circling anymore. They were biting. My father released another statement, claiming the chemical spill was sabotage by disgruntled former employees. He was trying to frame me. He was trying to say I planted a logic bomb. I looked at Marcus. "They are blaming you," Marcus said. "Robert Rowland just went on Fox News and implied his daughter tampered with the manifests before she left." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made the bartender look up. "Let them," I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You are not going to defend yourself." I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, looking out at the dark ocean. "Defense is for people who are guilty." I said, "I have the truth. And the truth is sitting in a forensic data cache that creates a timestamp every time a file is accessed. I can prove I didn't touch that manifest. I can prove the system was working perfectly until they tried to break it. But not yet." I turned back to Marcus. "Let the stock drop another 20%, I said. "Let the EPA file criminal charges. Let the creditors call in the loans. You want them dead." Marcus whispered, "Not physically, but you want the name Rowland to be synonymous with ash. I want them to understand." I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I want them to understand that you do not fire the lighthouse keeper and then complain when the ship hits the rocks." The phone at the resort's front desk began to ring. It was a satellite line, reserved for emergencies. The manager walked over to me, looking apologetic. "Ms. Rowland," he asked, "I am so sorry to disturb you, but a Mr. Robert Rowland is on the line. He says it is a matter of life and death. He says he is willing to pay whatever you want." I looked at the phone receiver in the manager's hand. It looked heavy. "Tell him," I said, picking up my cocktail, "that the user he is trying to reach is currently out of service." The manager blinked. Just that, tell him to leave a message after the beep," I added, "and then hang up." I watched the manager walk away. I took a sip of my drink. It tasted like victory. The chaos had begun, and I was the eye of the storm. The rain in New York was different from the tropical downpours of Indonesia. In Raja Ampat, the rain was warm and cleansing, a temporary curtain that lifted to reveal paradise. In Manhattan, the rain was cold, gray, and tasted of soot. It did not wash the city clean. It simply drove the rats underground. I did not go back to my penthouse. That was the first place they would look. Instead, I took a black car directly from the private airfield to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. There was no brass plaque on the door, no sign indicating a business. This was the office of Elias Thorne. a lawyer who specialized in what polite society called asset recovery and what the rest of the world called corporate grave digging. I sat in his leather armchair, the smell of old tobacco and lemon polish filling the room. Elias did not offer me tea. He offered me a file folder. "We have the leverage," Elias said, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. "But leverage is kinetic energy. It only matters if you release it." I opened the folder. It contained the work of my shadow. Before I left Vanguard, I had not just relied on my own fail-safes. I had cultivated loyalty in the one department Julian deemed beneath his notice accounting. There was a junior auditor there, a woman whose student loans I had quietly paid off 3 years ago when her mother got cancer. I never asked for repayment. I only asked for eyes. She had delivered. The documents in front of me were digital screenshots of Julian's expense reports from the last 3 weeks. They were a masterpiece of stupidity. While the company stock was free-falling, Julian had been busy spending the operational budget on personal entertainment. There were wire transfers totaling $75,000 to a boutique jeweler in the Diamond District for a tennis bracelet. Julian did not play tennis, but his current mistress, an Instagram model named Kiki, certainly did. There were charges for a private jet to Las Vegas on a Tuesday, the same Tuesday the chemical spill happened in New Jersey. While hazardous materials teams were scrubbing acid off the highway, the CEO of Vanguard was at a blackjack table at the Bellagio, losing $50,000 of company money. "Release it," I said. Elias nodded. He tapped a key on his laptop. It was not a formal press release. We were not playing by the rules of the boardroom anymore. We were playing by the rules of the gutter. The leak went to a tabloid blog known for destroying political careers. Within 20 minutes, the headline was everywhere. Vanguard CEO gambles while Jersey burns. The secret Vegas trip. I watched the news on the television in Elias's office. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. The public could forgive incompetence. They could maybe even forgive an accident, but they could not forgive a CEO who was popping champagne and betting on red while their children's school was evacuated due to toxic fumes. The stock, which had been limping along, suddenly convulsed. I watched the ticker. Vanguard dropped 4% in 10 minutes, then 8%, then 15%. It was a bloodbath. My burner phone, which I had just activated, began to light up. I did not answer. I just watched the names scroll across the screen. Mother, father, mother, Julian, mother. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. By the time the count reached 20, my mother sent a text message. "Anastasia, please, we know you are back. We need you to issue a statement. Tell them Julian was in Vegas for a logistics conference. We will give you whatever you want. Just fix this." I deleted the message. A logistics conference. They wanted me to lie for them. They wanted me to use my reputation, the one I had built with blood and sweat, to shield the boy who had just set fire to my legacy. I let the phone ring. 30 calls, 40 calls, 50 calls. The vibration against the mahogany table sounded like a frantic heartbeat. Then, the television screen shifted. Breaking news. Julian Rowland was holding a press conference outside the headquarters. I leaned forward. This was the moment. Julian looked terrible. He was wearing a suit that cost $5,000, but he looked like he had slept in it. His eyes were darting around, looking for an exit. "Mr. Rowland," a reporter shouted, "is it true you used company funds to buy jewelry for your mistress?" Julian flinched. "That is a private matter." He stammered, "I am here to talk about the business." "What about the delays?" another reporter yelled. "Major retailers are canceling contracts. Consumers are waiting months for packages." Julian's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He stepped up to the microphone, his arrogance overriding his survival instinct. "Look," he snapped, "people need to calm down. The delays are not my fault. If customers want their cheap plastic junk overnight, maybe they should stop being so demanding. We are doing our best. If you want premium service, you have to pay premium prices. You cannot expect a Ferrari for the price of a Ford." I stared at the screen. My jaw actually unclenched, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. Elias let out a low whistle. He just blamed the customer. Elias whispered, He just told the American consumer to stop being cheap. It was suicide. Corporate suicide broadcast live in high definition. The backlash was immediate. Twitter, or whatever they called it now, lit up with rage. People were posting videos of themselves canceling orders. A major hashtag started trending boycott Vanguard. But while the world was focused on Julian's stupidity, I was looking at something else. I picked up the file again. I flipped past the jewelry receipts and the gambling debts. I was looking at the shipping manifest that my source had included in the data dump, the ones that had been flagged as irregular. These were the ghost contracts. I noticed a pattern. There were 6 shipments scheduled for the coming month. The route was from a small, unregulated port in South America to a private distribution hub in Miami. The contents were listed as agricultural machinery, but the weight was wrong. I had spent a decade memorizing the weight of freight. I knew that a container of combine harvester parts should weigh roughly 28,000 pounds. The manifests listed these containers at 4,000 pounds. They were empty, or at least, they were not carrying heavy machinery. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the back end of the customs database, a backdoor access I had retained from my days on the advisory board for port security. I cross-referenced the container IDs. These containers had been flagged 3 times for expedited clearance. That meant someone had paid a premium to skip the standard X-ray inspection. Who paid the premium? I traced the payment. It came from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company that listed a single director, J.R. Holdings. Julian Rowland. My heart went cold. This was not just embezzlement. Embezzlement is stealing money from the company. This was using the company infrastructure to move illicit goods. If the containers were light, and they were skipping X-rays coming from that specific region, there were only 2 possibilities: drugs or cash. I dug deeper. I looked at the dates of these shipments. They started 4 months ago. 4 months ago. That was when Julian had suddenly paid off his first gambling debt, the one I thought I had covered. But he had mysteriously found extra cash for... Then I saw the email. It was in a buried thread between my father, Robert, and Julian. My source had managed to grab it from the server before the lockdown. Subject: the oversight problem. Date: 2 months ago. From Robert Rowland to Julian Rowland Julian. We cannot run the new partnerships through the Miami hub as long as Anastasia is checking the manifests. She is too thorough. She flags every weight discrepancy. If she sees the JR containers, she will ask questions. We need to remove the bottleneck. We need to get her out of the operations chair before the next big shipment in February. I stopped breathing for a moment. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. They did not fire me because I was a woman. They did not fire me because Julian needed an ego boost. They did not fire me because they wanted a masculine vision. They fired me because I was in the way. My own father, my own mother, they knew. They were not just enabling a lazy son. They were complicit in a federal crime. They were using the logistics empire my grandfather built to launder money for a cartel or a syndicate. I was the bottleneck. My competence was the threat. My honesty was the liability. I looked at the 50 missed calls on my phone. They were not calling to ask me to save the stock price. They were calling because the system lockdown I initiated had frozen the special containers. The criminals they were working with, the people who undoubtedly did not accept excuses, were waiting for their shipment. And the shipment was stuck in digital limbo because of me. The panic in their voices, the desperation in my mother's text. It wasn't about reputation, it was about fear. They were terrified. I closed the laptop. A cold, hard clarity settled over me, heavier than the rain outside. This was no longer a family dispute. This was not a story about a sister teaching her brother a lesson. This was war. I looked at Elias. "Do we have enough to go to the SEC?" Elias asked, eyeing the documents. "The SEC," I said, standing up and walking to the window. I looked out at the wet streets of Brooklyn. "The SEC deals with fines." "Elias, they deal with civil penalties." I turned back to him. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. "If we go to the SEC, they get a slap on the wrist and a ban from trading. They retire to the Hamptons." I tapped the stack of manifests. "This is not for the SEC." I said, "This is for the DEA." This is for the FBI. This is for the Department of Justice. But if you do that, Elias warned, his voice low, if you expose this, the company dies. Vanguard ceases to exist. The assets will be seized. The stock goes to zero. Your inheritance, your legacy, it all turns to dust. I looked at the image of Julian on the mute television, sweating under the lights. I thought of my father's fake smile. I thought of my mother's cruel words about coloring books. They were willing to sell my soul to smugglers. They were willing to poison a highway to keep their secrets. I do not want the legacy, I said. I picked up the phone. It was vibrating again. Call number 51. It was my father. I answered it. Anastasia. His voice was a shriek. Thank God. Where are you? You have to unlock the system. There are containers in Miami. Sensitive containers. Clients are threatening us. Hello, Father, I said. My voice was soft, terrifyingly calm. Anna, listen to me, he pleaded. Just give us the admin code. We can talk about a settlement. We can give you the CEO title back. Just unlock the Miami manifests. I am afraid I cannot do that. I said. Why? He screamed. Why? Because, I said, leaning in close to the microphone. So he could hear the smile in my voice. I just forwarded them to the FBI. I hung up. I looked at Elias. Burn it down, I said, and for the first time in weeks. The storm outside matched the storm inside me. The third week was not a decline. It was a demolition. If the first 2 weeks were the sound of a foundation cracking, the third week was the sound of the entire skyscraper turning to dust. It started at 8:30 in the morning on a Monday, 30 minutes before the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. I was sitting in a corner booth of The Grind, a coffee shop directly across the street from the Vanguard Logistics Tower. I had chosen this spot deliberately. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, excellent herbal tea, and a direct line of sight to the revolving doors I had walked out of 21 days ago. I wore a scarf and large sunglasses. Though honestly, nobody was looking for me. They were too busy looking at the disaster unfolding on the oversized monitors mounted on the wall. The news broke with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Securities and Exchange Commission launches. Formal investigation into Vanguard Logistics. Trading halted pending news. The headline flashed in red. The ticker symbol for Vanguard, VGL, was frozen on the screen. It was the result of the call I had made to the FBI. The federal agents had moved fast. They had raided the Miami hub at dawn, seizing the containers full of agricultural machinery that were actually packed with vacuum-sealed bricks of illicit cash and narcotics. The raid triggered an automatic flag at the SEC. When a logistics company is caught smuggling for a cartel, the financial regulators do not ask polite questions. They freeze everything. At 9:30, the market opened. The halt on Vanguard was lifted for 10 seconds before the circuit breakers kicked in. I watched the graph on my iPad. It was not a curve. It was a cliff. The stock opened at $42. Within 3 minutes, it was trading at $12. By lunch, it was at $4. 70% of the company's value evaporated in the time it took me to finish a croissant. The wealth of the Rowland family, which had taken 3 generations to build, was being deleted from existence at a rate of $10 million a minute. But the stock crash was just the lightning. The thunder came from the banks. Vanguard operated on a massive revolving line of credit. We needed cash flow to pay for fuel, port fees, and the salaries of 10,000 employees while we waited for clients to pay their invoices. That credit line was secured by the company stock. When the stock crashed, the collateral became worthless. At 11 o'clock, I saw a notification on the financial newswire. JP Morgan and Citibank. Suspend credit facilities for Vanguard Logistics. That was the kill shot. Without credit. The fuel cards for the trucks stopped working. The ships in transit were denied entry to ports because they could not pay the docking fees. The entire circulatory system of the company stopped. And then, the noise started. I looked out the window. A crowd was gathering at the base of the tower. It started with a few dozen people couriers, administrative assistants, warehouse managers who worked in the city hub. They were holding signs. They were shouting, "Pay us! Where is our money, jail the Rowlands?" The payroll system had missed its cycle yesterday. For the first time in 50 years, Vanguard had failed to pay its employees. I watched as the crowd grew. It became a sea of angry faces. I recognized some of them. There was Brenda from Accounts Payable. There was Mike from the mailroom. These were good people, loyal people. They had mortgages. They had children. And now, they were standing in the cold, screaming at the glass fortress where my brother was hiding. I took a sip of my chamomile tea. It was warm, contrasting with the chill running down my spine. I felt a pang of guilt for them, but I reminded myself that I could not save them by enabling the monster. The only way to cure the infection was to let the fever burn it out. My phone, lying face up on the table, began its dance. It had been vibrating incessantly for 2 hours. But now the intensity increased. The screen lit up with names that used to make me flinch. Mother, Julian, Robert, family lawyer, Aunt Margaret, cousin Timothy. They were panicked. They were rats on a sinking ship, realizing that the water was not just rising, it was boiling. I did not touch the phone. I just watched the notifications stack up. Voicemail from Mother Anastasia. Pick up the bank. Just declined my card at the pharmacy. This is humiliating voicemail from Julian Anna. Seriously, stop joking around. The FBI is in the lobby. You need to come down here and tell them it was your error. I cannot go to jail. I am too pretty for jail. I let out a short, dry laugh. Julian was worried about his appearance. He was watching his inheritance turn to ash, and his primary concern was his vanity. Across the street, the situation was escalating. A news van had pulled up to the curb. A reporter was standing in front of the protesters, gesturing wildly at the building. Then, I saw movement in the lobby. Security guards, the few who hadn't walked off the job, were struggling to hold back the crowd. The revolving doors were locked. Inside, I could see figures in suits running back and forth like trapped insects. I knew exactly where Julian was. He would be in the executive suite on the top floor, likely under his desk. The windows of that office were bulletproof, a feature my father had installed after the riots in the 90s. Julian was safe from the stones, but he was not safe from the truth. Suddenly, an ambulance screamed down the avenue, parting the sea of protesters. Its lights flashed red and white, reflecting off the glass of the tower. I watched as the paramedics rushed into the building. 10 minutes later, they emerged. They were wheeling a stretcher. On it lay a man. He was wearing a navy suit. An oxygen mask covered his face, but I recognized the shock of white hair. Robert, my father. I watched them load him into the back of the ambulance. The crowd went silent for a moment, the anger pausing in the face of mortality. My phone buzzed again, a text message. It was from Eleanor. Dad is dying. He collapsed. Heart attack. Are you happy now? You did this? You are cold-blooded. You are a monster. Come to the hospital. Come fix this. Save us. I stared at the words. Save us. Not save him. Save us. Even in the face of death. Her priority was the collective entity of the family. The reputation. The money. She did not want me to hold his hand. She wanted me to sign a check. She wanted me to take the blame so the stress would stop. I looked at the ambulance as it sped away. Sirens wailing. I felt nothing. No, that is not true. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. I had spent 34 years trying to keep that man's heart beating. I had covered his mistakes. I had smoothed over his frauds. I had acted as the pacemaker for his ego. If his heart was failing now, it was because it was finally forced to pump its own blood. I looked back at my phone. The missed call counter on the icon was a red badge of honor. It had been climbing all morning. 650, 655, 660. The phone vibrated again. Julian, 661. Then the family lawyer, 662. Then Eleanor again, 663. I picked up the phone. I did not answer. I unlocked it and went to the call log. I scrolled through the endless list of red names. The desperation was palpable. Every missed call was a plea for salvation from people who had thrown me away like garbage 3 weeks ago. They wanted the fixer. They wanted the daughter who made herself useful. But that daughter was dead. She died in the boardroom the day they handed her a cardboard box. The phone buzzed 3 more times in rapid succession. 666. I froze. The number stared up at me. The mark of the beast. The number of the devil. Or, in this case, the number of missed opportunities to treat me like a human being. It was poetic. It was perfect. I held the phone up. The background of my lock screen was still the default photo of a calm ocean, but the foreground was a wall of red notifications. I took a screenshot. Click. I opened the social media app, the one I had used to post the whistleblowing evidence, the one that now had millions of followers watching the drama unfold. I uploaded the screenshot. I typed a caption. My fingers moved smoothly over the glass. Family fired me to make my lazy brother CEO 3 weeks later. The stock crashed. 666 missed calls. And then, I added one final line below it. Karma has no caller ID. I hit post. I watched the engagement meter spin for a second, and then explode. Likes, retweets, and comments poured in like a waterfall. The world was watching the fall of the House of Rowland, and I had just given them the closing credit. I put the phone down. I looked across the street one last time. The protesters were still chanting. The ambulance was gone. The FBI agents were now leading people out of the building in handcuffs. I saw Julian's assistant, a young woman named Sarah, weeping as she was escorted to a black sedan. And then, I saw him, Julian. He was not in handcuffs yet, but he was being flanked by 2 federal agents. He was not wearing his jacket. His tie was gone. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. He looked up, for a second, across the 4 lanes of traffic, across the sea of protesters, across the barrier between ruin and redemption. Our eyes met. He saw me. He saw me sitting in the window of the cafe, a cup of tea in my hand, watching him. His mouth opened. He screamed something. I could not hear him through the glass, but I could read his lips. Help me. I looked at him. I raised my teacup in a small, silent toast. No. The agents pushed him into the car. The door slammed shut. The convoy drove away. The show was over. I signaled the waiter. Check, please, I said. The waiter, a young man with tattoos on his arms, walked over. He looked at the chaos outside, then at me. Crazy day. Huh, he asked. I pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on the table. You have no idea, I said. I gathered my things, my coat, my scarf, my sunglasses. I walked out of the cafe, but I did not turn toward the Vanguard Tower. I turned in the opposite direction. My father was in the hospital. My brother was in federal custody. My mother was alone in a mansion that was about to be seized by the government. And I was going to the movies. I heard there was a comedy playing, and for the first time in years, I felt like laughing. Desperation has a distinct scent. It smells like stale coffee, expensive cologne applied to mask the sweat of fear, and the ozone tang of a thunderstorm that is about to break. 3 days after the stock collapsed, the Rowland family stopped threatening me. The angry voicemails ceased. The legal notices threatening defamation suits stopped arriving at Elias's office. Instead, the silence was replaced by a diplomatic envoy. They sent Arthur Pendleton. Arthur had been the family's personal attorney for 30 years. He was a man who specialized in burying secrets and drafting prenuptial agreements that left ex-wives with nothing but their maiden names. He met me at a neutral location, a quiet tea house in the Upper East Side, wearing a suit that looked like it had been slept in. He did not order tea. He slid a single sheet of paper across the marble table. "Your father is willing to forgive," Arthur said, his voice quiet. "He wants you to come home. Anastasia, he wants you back in the fold." I looked at the paper. It was an employment contract. Position honorary advisor to the board. Salary $85,000 per annum. Benefits none. Equity 5% stock option. vesting after 5 years, contingent on company performance. It was an insult. $85,000 was less than I paid my executive assistant, and 5% of a company that was currently trading at the price of a used paperback book was effectively zero. But I did not throw the paper in his face. I studied it, I looked for the trap, and there it was, in the fine print of Clause 4. The advisor agrees to assume retroactive responsibility for all technical oversight of the Vanguard Logistics operational framework for the preceding fiscal year. They wanted me to sign a confession. They wanted to hire me back just so they could legally pin the negligence, the chemical spill, and the system failure on me. They wanted to parade me in front of the cameras and say, "Look, the prodigal daughter returned to fix the mess she created." I looked up at Arthur. "They are desperate." I said. Arthur sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked old, defeated. "The FBI is seizing hard drives. Anastasia, the banks are calling in the loans by Friday, if the stock does not rebound by Monday. The NASDAQ delists them. They need a scapegoat. They need a narrative shift. If you come back, the market might stabilize. Investors trust you." I tapped the paper. "I want to hear it from them." I said. Arthur blinked. "Excuse me. I want them to ask me, face to face. If they want me to save them, they have to look me in the eye and ask." Arthur nodded slowly. He made a call. 2 hours later, a black car dropped me off at the gates of the Rowland estate, the mansion, a sprawling Georgian revival structure that had housed 4 generations of my family, looked different. The grass was uncut. The fountain in the driveway, usually bubbling with crystal-clear water, was dry. The landscapers had clearly not been paid. I walked up the stone steps. The door was opened not by the butler, he was likely gone too, but by my mother. Eleanor Rowland looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped on a concrete floor and glued back together. Her makeup was thick, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She wore a black dress, as if she were already in mourning. "Anastasia," she whispered. She reached out to hug me. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. She froze, her hands hovering in the air. Then she dropped them, her face crumbling into a mask of rehearsed tragedy. "Come inside," she said. "Your father is waiting." We walked into the library. It was a room filled with books nobody read and leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in a gloomy sepia twilight. My father, Robert, was sitting in a wheelchair by the fireplace. A blanket was draped over his legs. He looked frail, his skin pale and waxy. It was a convincing performance. I knew for a fact that his heart attack was merely angina brought on by stress, and he had been discharged from the hospital yesterday with a clean bill of health. But for this scene, he needed to be the dying patriarch. Julian was there too. He was pacing back and forth in front of the window, chewing on his fingernails. He looked frantic. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, like a layer of ice over a deep, dark lake of panic. "Anastasia," Robert said, his voice a raspy whisper. "You came." I stood in the center of the room. I did not sit down. "Arthur said you had a proposal." I said. Julian stopped pacing. He turned to me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Just sign the papers." "Anna," he snapped, "just sign them and we can end this nightmare. The press is outside. The feds are sniffing around. If you sign, we can issue a press release saying you were conducting a stress test on the system and it went wrong. We can say it was an internal audit that got out of hand." I looked at him. "You want me to say I broke the company on purpose?" I asked. "We want you to say you made a mistake," Eleanor cried out, clasping her hands. "A mistake, Anastasia. People forgive mistakes, but they do not forgive they do not forgive what is happening to Julian." "And what is happening to Julian?" I asked. "He is being persecuted," she wailed. "The media is tearing him apart. They are calling him incompetent. They are calling him a criminal." I looked at Julian. "Maybe the shoe fits," I said. Julian slammed his hand on the mahogany desk. "Don't you dare judge me," he shouted. "You think you are so perfect with your spreadsheets and your protocols? You don't know the pressure I was under. You don't know what it takes to keep this family in the lifestyle you all enjoy." I reached up and adjusted the silver brooch on my lapel. It was a simple piece of jewelry, a sterling silver leaf. Inside the stem was a high-fidelity microphone, currently recording every syllable in uncompressed audio. "Tell me." "Julian," I said, keeping my voice calm, enticing him. "What pressure? You were the CEO for 3 weeks. You spent the operational budget on a villa in Cabo. That does not look like pressure. That looks like theft." "It wasn't theft," Julian yelled. "It was a liquidity transfer. I needed the cash to pay the bridge loan." "What bridge loan?" I asked. "The company has a credit line with Chase." "Not the company loan," Robert cut in, his voice suddenly losing its rasp. He sat up straighter in the wheelchair, forgetting his role for a second. "The private loan, the one we took out to cover the margin calls on the futures market." I turned to my father. "You were gambling with company stock?" I asked. "We were leveraging," Robert said, defensive now. "And that is why you fired me," I said softly. Eleanor stepped forward, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We had to, darling," she said, her voice trembling. "You are so rigid. You check every box. You weigh every container. If you had seen the discrepancy in the Miami shipments, you would have reported it. You would have called the police. You have no flexibility, no loyalty to the family. Loyalty," I repeated. "You define loyalty as helping you commit a felony. We define loyalty as doing what is necessary to survive," Robert shouted from his chair. He threw the blanket off his legs. The miracle of adrenaline apparently cured his paralysis. He stood up. "Look at this house." Anastasia Robert gestured around the room. "Look at your mother's jewelry. Look at the cars. Do you think shipping corn and televisions pays for this? The margins on legitimate freight are 3%. We needed more. Julian found a way to get 20%. He is a visionary, I said. A visionary who forgot that the system automatically locks down if he does not scan his eyes once a week. "That is your fault," Julian screamed. "You built that stupid trap. You rigged the game." "I did not rig anything," I said. "I built a security system to protect the company from criminals. I just didn't realize the criminals were sitting in the boardroom." Julian grabbed the contract from the table and shoved it against my chest. "Sign it," he demanded. "Sign the confession. Take the blame for the system lockout. Tell the FBI it was a coding error you left behind. If you do that, the investigation stops. The stock recovers. We can pay off the cartel. We can go back to normal. And if I don't," I asked. Robert stepped closer. His face was twisted in a snarl that I had never seen before. "If you don't," he said, his voice low and menacing, "we will testify that you were the mastermind. We will tell the FBI that the Miami scheme was your idea, that you set it up before you left, and we only found out about it after you were gone. It is 3 against 1, Anastasia. We have the emails forged. We have the paper trail ready. You go to prison either way. But if you sign this, we will make sure you have money in your commissary account." I looked at them. My father, the liar, my mother, the enabler, my brother, the thief. They were not asking for help. They were holding a gun to my head. They had prepared a frame job. If I didn't voluntarily take the fall, they were going to perjure themselves to destroy me. I looked down at the contract. Clause 4. Assume retroactive responsibility. I looked at Julian. "You really believe this will work?" I asked. "You really believe that if I sign this, the world will just move on?" "It has to," Julian said. "People have short memories. They just want their packages delivered." I took a pen from the desk. The room went silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick. Tock, tick, tock. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. Robert smiled. A cruel, triumphant curving of his lips. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me again. I held the pen over the paper. "I need a moment," I said. "My hand is shaking." "Take your time," Eleanor said soothingly. "Just do the right thing. Sarah. Family helps family." She called me Sarah. She was so flustered, so focused on the manipulation. That she used the name of a cousin who died 10 years ago. She didn't even know who I was. She just knew I was a resource to be harvested. I put the pen down. I cannot sign this here. I said, I need to take it to the notary. It needs to be official if it is going to stand up in court. Julian narrowed his eyes. You are not leaving with that paper. He said, I am not leaving with the paper. I said, I will leave the paper here. I just need to go to the bathroom. Then I will come back and sign. I need to wash my face. I feel faint. I swayed slightly on my feet. A calculated performance. Eleanor rushed forward. Oh, poor dear, she said. Of course. Go freshen up. We will wait right here. I walked out of the library. I walked down the hall to the powder room. I locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look faint. I looked like a wolf that had just cornered a rabbit. I reached up and unpinned the silver brooch. I pressed a tiny button on the back. A small green light flashed once. Recording saved. I had it all. The confession of money laundering, the admission of the cartel connection, the threat to frame me, the acknowledgement that the Miami containers were filled with dirty cash. It was not just evidence. It was a death sentence for the Rowland dynasty. I put the brooch back on. I unlocked the bathroom door. I did not go back to the library. I walked to the front door. I opened it quietly. The black car was still waiting. I slipped into the back seat. Drive, I said to the driver. Where to? Miss, he asked. The Federal Building. I said, Lower Manhattan. And hurry, I have a delivery to make. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the house. I saw the curtain in the library window move. I saw Julian's face appear, confused, then angry. He was watching me leave. He was realizing, slowly, that I wasn't coming back to sign his permission slip. He was realizing that the trap had indeed snapped shut, but his leg was the one caught in the steel teeth. I sat in the back of the town car, the leather seat cool against my legs, the city blurring past in streaks of gray rain. My heart was not pounding. It was beating with the slow, heavy rhythm of a war drum. I had the recording. I had the confession. But I realized, as I looked at the sleek black laptop resting in my bag, that I did not just want to put them in prison. Prison is a state institution. It is impersonal. I wanted to bankrupt them first. I picked up my phone. I dialed Julian. He answered on the first ring. Where are you? He demanded, his voice tight with panic. You walked out. Mother is having a panic attack. I am on my way to the notary. I lied. My voice was steady, resigned. I played the part of the beaten sister one last time. I thought about what you said, about the family, about the legacy. You are right. I cannot let Vanguard fall. I cannot let the name Rowland be destroyed. I heard him exhale. A sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Thank God. Julian breathed. You are making the right choice. Anna, seriously, we will take care of you. We will make sure you are comfortable. I cut him off. I will sign the papers. Julian, but we have a problem. The banks close in 2 hours. If the system is not back online by 5 o'clock, the credit default swaps trigger automatically. We lose the liquidity. I know, he shouted. That is why you need to hurry. I cannot fix it from the notary's office without access. I said, I need the root admin keys. I need the master password for the mainframe, the one you changed when you fired me. There was a pause, the hesitation of a thief who is afraid of being robbed. I cannot give you that. Julian stammered. That gives you control over the accounts. Then I cannot save the ship. I said, my voice cold. I can sign the confession. Julian, but a piece of paper does not reboot a server. Only I can do that, and I cannot do it if you keep me locked out. Do you want to be the CEO of a company that exists, or the CEO of a crater? He was silent for 3 seconds. I could hear him breathing. I could hear my father whispering frantically in the background. Fine, Julian snapped. I am texting you the RSA token now, but only for 24 hours. Once the patch is applied, I am revoking it. That is all I need. I said. A moment later, my phone buzzed. A string of numbers. The keys to the kingdom. I opened my laptop. I did not tell the driver to stop. I let him drive toward the federal building, but I had work to do before we arrived. I logged in. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Welcome. Administrator. It was like stepping back into my own body after an out-of-body experience. The architecture of the Vanguard digital universe unfolded before me. I saw the frozen shipping lanes, the locked accounts, the red warning lights blinking like a Christmas tree of disaster. I did not touch the shipping codes. I did not unlock the containers in Miami. Instead, I went deep. Julian thought he was clever. When he started the money laundering scheme, he had hired a shady third-party consultant to wipe the transaction logs. He thought that by hitting delete on the dashboard, the data was gone. But Julian did not understand how servers work. He did not understand that Vanguard used a physical RAID array for data redundancy. When you delete a file from the interface, it does not disappear. It is simply marked as overwritable on the primary drive. But the shadow copy. The backup that mirrors every keystroke to a secure server in the basement, a server I had physically installed 5 years ago behind a false panel in the server room. That copy was untouched. I accessed the shadow drive. I searched for the tag JR Holdings, and there it was, the Black Ledger. It was not a literal book, but a database of shame, thousands of rows of data, every bribe, every payoff to customs officials, every dollar received from the cartel. It was all there, preserved in high-definition digital clarity. I saw the total balance in the slush fund account. Julian had been siphoning the cartel money into a holding account in the Cayman Islands, waiting to distribute it to the family. $52 million. $52 million of blood money. Money made from moving narcotics while our legitimate employees were standing in bread lines because their paychecks had bounced. I looked at the number. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I could have frozen it. I could have just handed the data to the FBI and let them seize it in 6 months. But 6 months was too long. Brenda from Accounts Payable needed to pay her mortgage next week. The warehouse workers needed to feed their children tonight. I opened a new window. I navigated to the court-appointed escrow service. This was a system used for class action settlements. I had the routing number for the Vanguard Employee Compensation Fund, a dormant account I had set up years ago for a workers' comp case. I initiated a wire transfer. Source JR Holdings Cayman. Destination Vanguard Employee Compensation Fund, escrow. Amount $52,431,822. I clicked transfer. The system prompted me. This transaction exceeds standard limits. Authorization required. I typed in the code Julian had just given me. Processing. Transaction complete. I watched the balance of Julian's secret fortune drop to zero. In 1 second, the cartel's money became the workers' severance pay. It was the most beautiful theft I had ever committed, but I was not done. I opened the company's internal communication system. I selected all contacts. This list included every employee, every vendor, every board member, and every single shareholder who owned more than 1% of the company's stock. I composed a new email. Subject: resignation and disclosure. To the shareholders and staff of Vanguard Logistics, effective immediately. I am declining the position of honorary advisor. I cannot in good conscience serve a leadership team that has prioritized criminal enterprise over corporate responsibility. For the past 3 weeks, you have been told that the company's failure was due to a technical glitch or a cyber attack. This is a lie. The failure was a deliberate sabotage caused by the removal of safety protocols to facilitate the smuggling of illicit goods. Attached to this email is an audio recording taken 45 minutes ago inside the Rowland estate. In it, you will hear CEO Julian Rowland and Board Chairman Robert Rowland admit to money laundering, fraud, and a conspiracy to frame a former executive for their crimes. The $52 million previously held in the CEO's discretionary offshore fund has been successfully transferred to a court-monitored escrow account to ensure all employee back wages and severance packages are paid in full. The authorities have been notified. Regards, Anastasia Rowland. I attached the audio file. I took a deep breath. This was it. The bridge was not just burning. I was blowing up the pilings. I hit send. The progress bar moved across the screen. Sent. 10,000 inboxes pinged simultaneously. I closed the laptop. I leaned back in the seat. The car was slowing down. We were approaching the federal building. My phone began to ring. It was not Julian. It was an automated alert from my banking app, the one I shared with the family trust for compliance reasons. Alert account freeze initiated. The Swiss authorities were fast. My email had likely triggered an automatic compliance algorithm at the bank in Zurich. Or perhaps the FBI had already made the call. Either way, the family trust, the main artery of the Rowland wealth, was now iced over. Then, the phone rang for real. It was Julian. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. I could imagine the scene. He would be standing in the library, his phone buzzing with alerts from the bank. Insufficient funds, account locked, transfer denied. He would be checking his email. He would see the message I sent to the world. He would click play on the audio file. He would hear his own voice, shrill and arrogant, admitting to the crime. They pay a 20% premium. It was easy money. He would look at Robert, he would look at Eleanor, and he would realize that the sister he thought was a coloring book illustrator had just painted him into a corner he could never escape. I checked the flight tracker app on my phone. I had one last notification to verify. Julian had a standing reservation on a private jet leaving for Montenegro at 8 o'clock tonight. It was his escape plan. Montenegro has no extradition treaty for certain financial crimes. I refreshed the page. Status canceled. Reason passenger on no-fly list /DHS hold. He was trapped. He was broke. And everyone he knew had just heard him confess to being a felon. The car stopped. "We are here, Miss," the driver said. I looked out the window. The federal building loomed above me, a monolith of concrete and justice. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I did not run. I walked. I walked with the lightness of a woman who had just unloaded a very heavy burden. I walked through the security checkpoint. I showed my ID. "I am here to see Special Agent Miller." I told the guard, "I believe he is expecting me." The guard looked at his list. He looked at me. His eyes widened slightly. "Ms. Rowland," he asked. "That is me," I said. He picked up his radio. "Agent Miller. The witness is here." I smiled. "Witness? Not suspect, not accomplice, witness." As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Julian. "You killed us." I looked at the text. I thought about the chemical spill. I thought about the employees who couldn't pay rent. I thought about the lies. I typed a reply. "I didn't kill you, Julian. I just made sure the autopsy was accurate." I dropped the phone into the trash can next to the elevator. The doors opened. I stepped inside. The turn was complete. The game was over. Now, it was just time to clean the board. The sun did not rise over New York City the next morning. It detonated. If the previous weeks had been a slow-motion car crash, this morning was the sound of the gas tank finally igniting. I woke up in a safe house provided by the federal authorities. A nondescript hotel room in Jersey City, with thick curtains and a coffee machine that tasted like burnt rubber. I turned on the television. Every single channel was broadcasting the same image. It was a photo of my brother, Julian, taken from his days as a frat boy, superimposed over a graphic of shattered glass. The headlines were not subtle. Rowland Empire collapses. CEO confesses to cartel ties on tape. The $52 million laundromat. How Vanguard Logistics was hacked from within. The sister who blew the whistle. Anastasia Rowland exposes family crime syndicate. The email I had sent at 5 o'clock the previous evening had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had gone viral, yes, but it had also acted as a digital warrant. By disseminating the confession to 10,000 people, I had removed any possibility of a cover-up. There was no judge in the state of New York who could deny a search warrant when the suspect had already emailed his confession to the entire frantic shareholder base. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the storm made landfall in the Hamptons. I was not there to see it, but the news helicopters were. They were hovering over the Rowland estate. Their cameras zoomed in with predatory precision. I watched the live feed on the hotel television, holding a cup of coffee that I forgot to drink. The convoy of black SUVs rolled through the front gates like a funeral procession for the living. These were not local police. These were armored units from the FBI, accompanied by forensic accountants from the IRS and agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration. They did not knock. I watched as the front door, the heavy oak door my mother had imported from a French chateau, was breached with a battering ram. The wood splintered. The agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that were muffled by the news chopper's rotor blades. And then, the moment the world had been waiting for. The camera panned to the back of the estate, to the high stone wall that separated the manicured gardens from the public beach. A figure was scrambling up the ivy. It was Julian. He was wearing silk pajamas and one loafer. He looked like a panicked rat trying to escape a sinking bucket. He clawed at the stones, his fingernails digging into the mortar, desperate to reach the top. He managed to pull himself up, straddling the wall, looking down at the beach where he presumably hoped to run. But waiting on the sand, standing with arms crossed and sunglasses reflecting the morning light, were two federal agents. They didn't even draw their weapons. They just looked up at him. "Go ahead, son." One of them seemed to say, "Jump." Julian froze. He looked back at the house, where agents were swarming the terrace. He looked down at the beach. He looked at the sky, realizing the helicopter was broadcasting his humiliation to millions of viewers. He didn't jump. He slumped. He slid back down the wall into the waiting arms of the law. I watched as they cuffed him. They didn't do it gently. They pulled his arms back, slamming him against the stone. He was screaming something, his face twisted in a tantrum that no amount of money could fix. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. My father, Robert, came out first. He was not in his wheelchair. He was walking, supported by a cane, looking small and gray. He wore a cardigan over his pajamas. He wasn't handcuffed, but an agent had a firm grip on his arm. He looked at the cameras, and for the first time in his life, he didn't pose. He looked down. Then came Eleanor, my mother. She was fighting. She was shouting at the agents, pointing a manicured finger at their badges. She was still trying to speak to the manager. She was demanding to know who authorized this, threatening to call the senator, the mayor, the governor. An agent simply guided her into the back of a waiting SUV. The door slammed shut. Cutting off her tirade, the convoy drove away, leaving tire tracks on the pristine lawn. I turned off the TV. "It is time," I said to myself. I dressed in a suit, not the black morning suit I had worn when I left, but a sharp navy blue power suit. I took a cab to the Vanguard headquarters. The scene there was different. The protesters were gone. In their place were federal agents carrying boxes. But unlike the raid at the house, this was orderly. The employees, the ones who had received the notification that their back wages were fully funded in escrow, were cooperating. I walked up to the yellow police tape. A young officer stepped forward to stop me. "Ma'am, this is a crime scene," he said. "I know," I replied. "I am the one who reported the crime." Agent Miller, the lead investigator I had met yesterday, stepped out of the lobby. He waved the officer aside. "Ms. Rowland," Miller said, "right on time. We have some questions about the server architecture. Julian's password works, but the encryption on the subdirectory is unique." I walked under the tape. I walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was filled with staff. When I entered, the noise level dropped. Hundreds of eyes turned to me. These were the people Julian had fired. These were the people whose pensions had been threatened. These were the people who had read my email and realized that I had stolen $52 million back from the cartel to pay them. Someone started clapping. It was Brenda from Accounts Payable. Then Mike from the mailroom joined in. Then the security guards. It wasn't a thunderous ovation. It was a slow, respectful applause. It was the sound of people acknowledging that the captain hadn't abandoned the ship. She had just gone below deck to patch the hull. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just nodded to them. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a salvage operation. I spent the next 6 hours in the conference room, the same room where I had been fired. I sat at the head of the table, not as CEO, but as the government's primary witness. I walked Agent Miller through the black ledger. I showed him how to decipher the code words Julian used for the drug shipments. I identified the shell companies. At 2:00 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Area code 212, the precinct. I looked at Agent Miller. That is them. Miller said, "They are allowed one phone call. They asked for their lawyer, but Arthur Pendleton resigned this morning. He said he doesn't represent criminal organizations. So, they asked for you." I put the phone on speaker. Anastasia. It was Eleanor. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the concrete walls of a holding cell. "I am here. Mother, how could you?" she screamed. The sound distorted the speaker. "How could you do this to your own blood?" "They took your father's cane. They put Julian in a cell with common criminals. He is terrified. He is crying. He committed a felony." "Mother," I said calmly, "prison is generally where felonies lead. We did this for the family," she sobbed. "We did this to build a legacy, and you destroyed it, you ungrateful, spiteful little witch. We gave you life. We gave you a home. You gave me a job," I corrected, "and then you fired me from it to protect a smuggler. You have to fix this," she demanded, pivoting from rage to bargaining in a heartbeat. "Call the judge. Tell them you made it up. Tell them the recording was doctored. We have money. Anastasia, we have hidden accounts in Zurich. We can pay you. The accounts in Zurich are frozen." I said, "The Swiss authorities cooperated with the DOJ about 3 hours ago. You have nothing." There was a silence on the other end, a deep, hollow silence as the reality of her poverty set in. Then Robert's voice came on the line. He sounded weak, broken. "Anna, please, we are your parents." I looked around the conference room. I looked at the agents boxing up the files. I looked at the rain falling against the window. "You are not my parents," I said. "You are the board of directors of a failed enterprise, and I just liquidated your assets," bitch Julian screamed from the background. "I will kill you, I will." I signaled to Agent Miller. He nodded. "I have work to do," I said into the phone. "The FBI needs help decoding your email history. Julian, you were very sloppy with your encryption." "Wait," Eleanor shrieked. "Who is going to represent us? We have no lawyer. We have no money." I paused. I let the words hang in the air for a second, savoring the taste of absolute justice. "Bothering me is not a legal strategy," I said. "You fired the only person who was smart enough to save you. But," Eleanor stammered, "good luck with the public defender." I said. I hung up. I turned the phone off. Agent Miller looked at me. He looked impressed, and perhaps a little frightened. That was cold. He said, "Ice preserves." I replied, "Heat rots." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of asset forfeiture. The government moves fast when headlines are involved. By 4:00, the seizure notices were posted. I saw the photos online. The big yellow stickers that read, "Property of the U.S. government," were slapped across the front gates of the mansion. The McLaren, the car Julian had bought with the company's blood money, was towed out of the headquarters garage. It was hooked up to a flatbed truck. Looking garish and stupid in the gray daylight, the yacht, the Lady Eleanor, docked in the Hamptons, was boarded by the Coast Guard. But the most brutal seizure wasn't physical. It was social. My mother lived for her status. She lived for the charity galas, the garden parties, the whispers of admiration in the country club dining room. By 5:00, the Metropolitan Museum of Art released a statement removing the Rowland name from their donor wall. The Botanical Garden canceled the upcoming Eleanor Rowland Rose Festival. The private schools where my cousins attended sent emails distancing themselves from the family. I checked my social media feed. The people who used to comment on my mother's photos with heart emojis and beautiful were now posting comments on news articles about the arrest. I always knew something was off about them. Grifters, trash with money, they were being erased, not just their money, but their identity. They were becoming radioactive. I walked out of the Vanguard building at 6 o'clock. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp, smelling of wet pavement and exhaust. I stood on the sidewalk. I had no home to go to. My penthouse was still technically a crime scene. Although Agent Miller had promised to clear it by tomorrow, I had no job. I had resigned from Vanguard, and the company would likely be dissolved or sold for parts. I was alone, but for the first time in 34 years, the silence in my head wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I hailed a taxi. Where to, the driver asked. I thought about it. I could go back to the hotel. I could go to a bar. Take me to the Brooklyn Bridge. I said. I wanted to walk across it. I wanted to stand in the middle of the river and look at the city. I wanted to see the skyline without the shadow of the Vanguard Tower looming over me. I paid the driver and got out at the pedestrian entrance. I walked up the wooden planks. The wind whipped my hair across my face. Below me, the cars rushed by. People going home to their families, to their dinners, to their small, manageable problems. I reached the middle of the bridge and stopped. I leaned against the railing. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out. It was a text from Marcus, the former prosecutor I met in Indonesia. Saw the news. Impressive. You didn't just burn the house down. You salted the earth. I smiled. They planted weeds. I typed back. I just did some gardening. Dinner, he asked. I am in the city. I know a place that serves excellent wine and doesn't ask questions. I looked at the text. I looked at the city lights. Send me the address. I typed. I put the phone in my pocket. I looked down at the dark water of the East River. Somewhere, deep in the Atlantic. My old phone was rusting on the ocean floor. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, my family was realizing that the storm they had summoned had finally come home. I turned my back on the river and started walking toward Manhattan. The storm had passed. Now, it was time to see what could grow in the aftermath. The death of a corporation is not loud. It does not sound like a bomb exploding or a building collapsing. It sounds like the polite murmur of a bankruptcy auction in a rented ballroom in Midtown Manhattan. Vanguard Logistics, the titan of industry my grandfather built and my father hollowed out, was dissolved on a rainy Tuesday morning. The Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing was absolute. There was no reorganization, no restructuring plan. The debts my brother had accrued, combined with the massive fines levied by the Department of Justice for money laundering, had exceeded the value of the assets by a factor of 3. The carcass of the company was dragged onto the auction block to be stripped for parts. I sat in the back row. I was not wearing a disguise this time. I was wearing a white suit, sharp and immaculate. Next to me sat Marcus, my new business partner. We had spent the last 2 weeks raising capital. It turns out, when you are the whistleblower who exposed a $50 million cartel scheme, investors view you as a paragon of integrity. We had raised $300 million in 48 hours. We watched the vultures circle. Competitors were there, hoping to pick up a few ships or a warehouse for pennies on the dollar. Lot number 42, the auctioneer droned. The North American trucking fleet, 500 tractors, 3,000 trailers, opening bid at $10 million. A man from a rival logistics firm raised his paddle. $10 million. Marcus looked at me. I nodded. $12 million? Marcus said, raising his paddle. The room turned. They recognized him, the former prosecutor. Then they saw me. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. She is back. She is buying it. $15 million? The rival bid. $20 million, Marcus said calmly. The rival hesitated. They knew the trucks were old. They didn't know that I had already negotiated a secret deal with the manufacturer to retrofit them at a 40% discount. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the gray suit. We bought the fleet. Then we bought the proprietary tracking software, the very system I had built. Then we bought the client list. Finally, we bought the headquarters building itself. By noon, we owned the skeleton of Vanguard Logistics. We had paid roughly 18 cents on the dollar. We walked out of the auction house as the owners of a ghost. What do we call it? Marcus asked, as we stood on the sidewalk. Vanguard is a poisoned name. You cannot put that on a letterhead. I looked at the paperwork in my hands. Phoenix Global, I said. Marcus smiled. A bit cliché. Isn't it rising from the ashes? It is accurate, I said. And unlike the bird, this phoenix has sharp talons. The first act of Phoenix Global was not to secure a client. It was to heal the wound. I sat in my old office, now my new office, and opened the HR database. I had the contact list of every person Julian had fired. I drafted a mass email. To the former staff of Vanguard. The storm is over. The ship has a new captain and a new name. Phoenix Global is open for business. Your old desks are waiting. Your seniority is restored. And to compensate for the disruption, all returning employees will receive a 15% raise. Effective immediately. Come home, Anastasia Rowland. CEO, they came back. Not all of them, but most. Mrs. Higgins, the HR director Julian had discarded like trash, was the first to walk through the door. She was crying. She hugged me, something that broke every corporate protocol in the book, but I didn't stop her. We are going to be okay, she sobbed. We are going to be better than okay, Mrs. Higgins. I told her, we are going to be the best. But while Phoenix Global was rising, the Rowland family was facing its judgment. The trial took place 3 months later. It was the spectacle of the year. The courtroom was packed every single day. I was the star witness for the prosecution. When I walked to the stand, I did not look at the defense table, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the heat of their hatred. I swore to tell the truth, and then I dissected them. The prosecutor asked me about the Miami shipments. I explained the weight discrepancies. I explained the shell companies. He asked me about the recording in the library. Can you identify the voices on this tape? The prosecutor asked. I looked at the jury. The voice suggesting the bribery is my brother, Julian Rowland, I said clearly. The voice threatening to frame me for the crime is my father, Robert Rowland. The voice encouraging me to sign the false confession is my mother, Eleanor Rowland. There was no emotion in my voice. I was reading a weather report. My father's lawyer tried to cross-examine me. He tried to paint me as a disgruntled daughter, a jealous sister who engineered the whole thing to steal the company. Ms. Rowland, isn't it true you were angry about being fired? He asked. I was not angry, I replied. I was relieved. Relieved, yes. It meant I was no longer an accessory to their incompetence. The jury laughed. The judge banged his gavel. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Julian Rowland, guilty on all counts, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy to traffic narcotics. Robert Rowland, guilty, conspiracy, securities fraud. Eleanor Rowland, guilty, aiding and abetting. Julian collapsed. He didn't just faint. He folded in on himself like a cheap lawn chair. He started sobbing. Loud, ugly sounds that echoed off the mahogany walls. Mom, he screamed. Mom, do something. Eleanor was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of shock. She couldn't process it. She was a Rowland. Rowlands didn't go to prison. Rowlands went to the Hamptons. Robert clutched his chest, playing the heart attack card one last time, but the paramedics checked him right there in the court. His vitals were fine. He was just terrified. The sentencing hearing was a week later. The judge was a stern woman who had clearly lost her patience with rich men who thought the law was a suggestion. Julian Rowland, she said, you are a danger to society. Not because you are violent, but because you are entitled. You treated a federal crime like a fraternity prank. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 12 years. 15 years. Julian howled. He was dragged out of the courtroom by 2 marshals, his feet dragging on the floor. Robert and Eleanor fared slightly better, but only slightly, because of their age and health. The judge showed mercy. 5 years probation. The judge ruled. However, the court orders full asset forfeiture to pay restitution to the victims and the state. You are stripped of all holdings. You are barred from serving as officers of any public company. You are left with nothing but your freedom, which is more than you deserve. They lost the mansion. They lost the cars. They lost the yacht. They lost the art collection. They lost the jewelry. Even the clothes on their backs were deemed proceeds of crime, though the state graciously allowed them to keep a suitcase of basics. They were moved into state-assisted housing. 6 months later, I went to see them. It was a cold November afternoon. I told my driver to wait on the corner. The building was a crumbling brick tenement in the Bronx, miles away from the gilded gates of their former life. The elevator was broken. I walked up 4 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. I knocked on door 4B. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, I barely recognized the woman standing there. Eleanor was wearing a faded bathrobe. Her hair, once dyed a rich chestnut and styled weekly, was gray and stringy. She looked 20 years older. She stared at me. Her eyes were dull, but as soon as she recognized me, a spark of the old malice flared up. "You!" she spat. "You have the nerve to come here. I wanted to see how you were settling in." I said. She tried to slam the door, but I put my hand out. I was wearing leather gloves. I pushed the door open effortlessly. I walked into the apartment. It was a single room, a kitchenette with a rusted stove, a sagging sofa that served as a bed, a television set from the 90s sitting on a milk crate. Robert was sitting on the sofa, staring at the TV. He didn't look up. He was wearing a stained undershirt. "Get out," Eleanor hissed. "Get out before I call the police, and tell them what I asked. That your daughter came to visit." "You are not my daughter," she said, her voice shaking. "You are a devil. You stole everything. You stole our life. You stole our boy. Julian stole his own life." I said. "I just stopped him from taking everyone else down with him." Robert finally looked up. His eyes were watery and yellow. "We gave you everything," he rasped. "We fed you. We clothed you. And this is how you repay us, by putting us in this rat hole." I looked around the apartment. "You put yourselves here. Robert, you bet the house on a criminal enterprise because you were too greedy to accept a 3% profit margin. You gambled. You lost. We are going to appeal," Eleanor said, lifting her chin in a pathetic imitation of her former haughtiness. "Arthur is working on it. We will get it all back, the house, the company, and when we do, we will crush you." I looked at her. She was delusional. Arthur Pendleton had been disbarred months ago. There was no appeal. There was no money for a lawyer. This was it. This room, with the peeling paint and the dripping faucet, was their finish line. I reached into my purse. I pulled out an envelope. Inside was $5,000 in cash. It was nothing to me now. It was pocket change. But to them, it was a fortune. I placed the envelope on the scarred laminate table. "Here," I said, "for groceries. Or heating. Winter is coming." Eleanor looked at the envelope. Her hands twitched. She wanted to throw it in my face. She wanted to scream that she didn't need my charity, but hunger is a powerful motivator. She didn't throw it. She stared at it, her pride warring with her survival instinct. "I don't want your money," she whispered, but she didn't move to touch it. "I know," I said, "but you need it." I turned to leave. "Why?" Robert asked. "Why didn't you just let us go? Why did you have to ruin us?" I stopped at the door. I looked back at them. 2 broken people who still believed they were the victims. They had learned nothing. There was no remorse in this room, only resentment. "Because, Father," I said, "you didn't just fire me. You tried to erase me. You told me I was nothing but a placeholder. You told me to go play with my coloring books." I opened the door. I finished the picture. I said, "I hope you like the colors." I walked out. I heard Eleanor scream something behind me, a curse word that echoed down the stairwell. I heard the sound of something shattering against the door, probably a cup. I didn't flinch. I walked down the 4 flights of stairs. I walked out into the cold air of the Bronx. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food, but to me, it smelled like ozone. I got into the back of my car. Back to the office, Miss Rowland, the driver, asked. Yes, I said. We have work to do. I looked out the window as the city rolled by. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. I had expected to feel sad. I had expected to feel a lingering sense of guilt, seeing my parents in such squalor, but I felt nothing. It was as if I had visited a museum exhibit about a tragedy that happened to strangers a long time ago. I observed it. I understood it. But I did not feel it. They were ghosts, and I was finally truly alive. The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was an email from Marcus. Subject: Quarterly Report. Phoenix Global. Attached Q. 1 performance. Net profit up 40%. Employee satisfaction at an all-time high. Also, the shipment of medical supplies to the disaster zone in Sudan has arrived safely. Good work. Partner. I smiled. I deleted the contact for Mom and Dad from my phone. 1 click, 2 clicks, gone. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The cleanse was complete. The infection was gone. The body was healing. And for the first time in history, the Phoenix wasn't just a myth. It was a logistics company with a AAA credit rating and a CEO who knew exactly how much weight the bridge could hold. 6 months later, the air on the 45th floor tasted different. For decades, the executive suite of Vanguard Logistics had smelled of stale cigar smoke, lemon furniture polish, and the heavy, suffocating scent of old money. It was a smell that commanded silence. It was a smell that said tradition was more important than innovation. It was the smell of a mausoleum where the living were buried alongside the dead, but Vanguard Logistics did not exist anymore. I stood in the center of my office, my heels sinking into a plush, dove-gray carpet. The heavy mahogany walls were gone, replaced by floor-to-ceiling sheets of smart glass that adjusted their tint based on the angle of the sun. The portraits of my stern-faced ancestors, the men who had built the empire on the backs of underpaid laborers, had been taken down. In their place hung large, vibrant, abstract canvases, painted by local artists I had personally commissioned to bring color into a space that had known only gray. This was now the headquarters of Phoenix Global. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. It was autumn in New York. The trees in Central Park were turning gold and crimson, a fire spreading across the landscape. From this height, the cars looked like toys, and the people were invisible specks, but I felt connected to them in a way I never had before. When I was the chief operating officer under my father, I felt like I was watching the world through a dirty lens, constantly cleaning up messes I didn't make. Now, I felt like the architect of the view. My desk was no longer a fortress meant to intimidate visitors. It was a sleek, collaborative table made of reclaimed teak. There were no stacks of paper, no hidden ledgers, no secret files. Phoenix Global operated on a radical transparency model. Every transaction, every contract, every shipment was logged on a secure blockchain ledger that any employee could audit. I had built an empire that did not need shadows to survive. My assistant, a brilliant young man named David, whom I had plucked from the mailroom after noticing he had reorganized the entire sorting system on his lunch break, buzzed in on the intercom. "Ms. Rowland," David said, his voice crisp. "The editor-in-chief from Forbes magazine is on line 1. They are calling to confirm the details for the cover shoot next Tuesday." I smiled. It was a small, private expression. "Put them through." "David," I said. I picked up the phone. "Ms. Rowland," the editor's voice was warm, bordering on reverence. "Thank you for taking the time. We are finalizing the layout for the December issue. The headline we are going with is, 'The Phoenix Rises Anastasia Rowland on Building a Billion-Dollar Brand from the Ashes of Betrayal.' How does that sound to you?" "It sounds accurate," I said. "But let us focus less on the betrayal and more on the building. I want the article to highlight the employee profit-sharing model. That is the real story." "Of course," the editor agreed quickly. "Businesswoman of the Year implies leadership, and your model is certainly revolutionary. We will see you Tuesday." I hung up. Businesswoman of the Year. 6 months ago. My mother had sat in this very room back when it was a shrine to my father's ego and told me I was not equipped for the real world. She had told me to go play with my coloring books. She had dismissed me as a decorative object, a woman who needed to be managed, protected, and ultimately discarded. Now, the world was acknowledging that the coloring book I had been working on was actually a blueprint for industry dominance. David walked into the office a moment later. He was holding a plastic bin of mail. "Most of it is standard," David said, placing the bin on the side table. "Contract renewals from Amazon, a thank you card from the Port Authority for the new safety protocols. Oh, and there is one letter from upstate." He held out a white envelope. It looked cheap. The paper was thin, the kind you buy in bulk. The stamp was crooked. I knew the handwriting immediately. It was jagged, rushed, and messy. It was from Julian. I took the envelope. I did not open it immediately. I ran my thumb over the return address. Otisville Federal Correctional Institution. My brother had been in prison for 180 days. I had not visited him. I had not taken his calls. I had severed the limb to save the body, and I had not looked back at the severed part. I used a silver letter opener to slit the top of the envelope. I pulled out the single sheet of lined yellow paper. "Anna, the food here is garbage. You have no idea. It is slop. I have lost 15 pounds. I need money for the commissary. The limit is $300 a month. That is nothing. That is pocket change. I need shampoo. The stuff they give us dries out my scalp. I need the good kind. You know the brand I like. Mom wrote to me. She said you visited them. She said you gave them $5,000. Why them and not me? I am your brother. I am family. This place is hell. I'm surrounded by animals. I do not belong here. Send the money. Please, just put it in my account. You have millions now. You won't even miss it. Don't be a bitch. Julian." I read the letter twice. Even in prison, even stripped of his suits and his sports cars and his title, he had not changed. He was still the same Julian, selfish, entitled, believing that the world owed him comfort simply because he existed. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask how I was. He asked for expensive shampoo. He called the other inmates animals, failing to realize that he was the one who had tried to poison a community with battery acid and wash drug money for a cartel. He was not a victim. He was a narcissist in a cage. I looked at the sentence. You won't even miss it. He was right. I wouldn't miss $300. But that wasn't the point. I wasn't withholding the money because I was greedy. I was withholding it because for the first time in his life, Julian Rowland had to live with the consequences of his own actions without a safety net. I walked over to the shredder that stood in the corner of the room. I fed the letter into the slot. The machine whirred. The sharp steel teeth grabbed the yellow paper and pulled it down. I watched as Julian's whining. His demands and his insults were sliced into thousands of tiny, unreadable confetti strips. It was a satisfying sound. Zzzt, and then silence. I walked back to my desk. I picked up my phone. I opened the contact list. I scrolled down to the bottom, to the blocked section. There were 3 names sitting in that digital purgatory. Dad, Mom, Julian. Blocking them had been a defensive measure. It was a wall I had built to keep their toxicity out while I was rebuilding the company. But walls, by their nature, acknowledge that there is something on the other side worth fearing. Walls imply a siege. I realized I didn't need a wall anymore. I didn't need to block them. Blocking them meant I was still holding on to the connection, just refusing to let it activate. I tapped the edit button. I selected Julian. Delete contact. This action cannot be undone. I hit confirm. I selected Mom. Delete contact. I hit confirm. I selected Dad. Delete contact. I hit confirm. The names vanished. The numbers were wiped from the cloud. If they called me now, they would be just like any other unknown number, a stranger trying to sell me something I didn't want. I put the phone down. I felt lighter. It was a physical sensation, as if gravity had released its hold on my shoulders just a fraction. David buzzed again. Ms. Rowland, the board is waiting in conference room A. Marcus is there with the quarterly projections. I am coming, I said. I picked up my tablet. I checked my reflection in the glass of the window. The woman staring back at me was not the tired, frantic fixer who had run Vanguard. She was not the daughter who craved approval. Her eyes were clear. Her posture was straight. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and decided she liked the heat. I walked out of my office. I walked down the hallway, the heels of my shoes clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the marble floor. Employees nodded as I passed. They didn't look down in fear. They looked me in the eye. They smiled. There was an energy in the office, a hum of productivity and purpose that had never existed under the Rowland regime. I reached the conference room. The glass doors slid open. Around the table sat 12 people. There was Marcus, my partner and legal counsel, looking sharp in charcoal gray. There was Mrs. Higgins, now the chief people officer. There was the young woman from the warehouse who had suggested the new tracking system. Now the head of innovation. It was a table of merit, a table of talent, a table of people who had earned their seats, not inherited them. Good morning, everyone, I said, taking my place at the head of the table. Good morning, Anastasia, Marcus said. We were just discussing the expansion into the European market. The numbers look aggressive. Aggressive is good, I said, opening my file. But let us make sure they are sustainable. We build on bedrock, not sand. I looked around the room. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the box of personal items I had carried out of this building 6 months ago. I thought about the rain in Indonesia. I thought about the 666 missed calls that had lit up my phone like a warning flare. They had tried to break me. They had tried to turn me into a footnote in their story of success. They had underestimated me because I was quiet. They had underestimated me because I was a woman. They had underestimated me because I was family. My father had once told me that business was a game of chess. He told me that the king was the most important piece, the one that must be protected at all costs. He told me that everyone else was just a pawn to be sacrificed to keep the king alive. He was wrong. I looked at the projection screen where the Phoenix Global logo, a stylized bird rising from a geometric flame, glowed in bright orange. They had sapped my energy, stole my ideas, and fired me to make my lazy brother the king. They thought that by removing the queen from the board, they had secured their victory, but they forgot the most basic rule of the game. In chess, the king is a weak piece. He can only move one square at a time. He spends the entire game hiding behind his castle, terrified of the open board. The queen. The queen can move anywhere. She can strike from a distance. She can cross the entire board in a single turn. She is the most dangerous, powerful, and lethal weapon in the game, and I was never a pawn. I looked at my team. I smiled. Let's get to work, I said. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption. It has been a wild ride from the boardroom to the courtroom, and I hope you enjoyed watching the Phoenix rise. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work in London, cooking dinner in Texas, or maybe relaxing on a beach in Bali like Anastasia? Drop a comment below with your location, and let me know what time it is in your part of the world. I read every single comment, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing justice served and the Rowland family get exactly what they deserved, please make sure to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the content. And if you really want to help this story reach more people, smash that hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep bringing you the best drama on the internet. Until next time, remember karma has no caller ID, but it always leaves a message. Stay strong.